Have you ever felt like you're carrying more than your fair share in relationships? Like you're always managing other people's emotions, solving their problems, or picking up the slack? This is Amara Strand. Welcome back. And today we're going to talk about what you're truly responsible for, and more importantly, what you're not. Because taking on other people's stuff is not only exhausting, but it's also silently eroding your clarity and redirecting your energy and focus away from your personal authority. We're going to look into your hidden motives for taking on things that aren't yours, and how it's distorting your reality, and of course, how to break free from the cycle. It's time to learn to remain faithful to yourself. So why do you assume ownership of responsibilities that don't belong to you? And believe me, you're not alone in this. But why do so many of us end up doing this? Well, you won't be surprised to learn that it starts pretty early. Maybe you were the one who kept the peace, took care of others, or stepped up when adults failed. And not only were you expected to do it, this is the tricky part, you were praised for it. You were told you were mature, helpful, selfless. And over time, this became part of your identity and a way to validate your self-worth. Now, as an adult, you may feel responsible for other people's emotions, their problems, and their happiness. You don't just help, you absorb. You don't just care, you carry. And even when you recognize the weight is not yours to bear, you might struggle to let it go because this identity has been with you for so long. And over time, this turns into a habit. You start absorbing people's emotions, taking responsibility for their happiness, and even feeling guilty or anxious when they struggle. And look, we all know that breaking habits can be hard, but letting go of an identity? Oh my stars, now that's a real task. Because not only do you claim on some level that this is who you are, you also believe that some of your value as a person derives from this. And you can see how this is really tricky. Your persona, your personal egregore, your synthetic self always looks outside itself for permission, authority, and self-worth. You've been conditioned to believe that taking on what belongs to others makes you valuable and worthy, and maybe even superior. Oh goodness, your motivations are looking less and less altruistic as we peel back the layers. But it's okay. All of this is usually deeply buried beneath your conscious awareness. Another piece of this responsibility puzzle is that you've built your relationships on unspoken agreements. Essentially, you have unconscious agreements with people in your life to assume responsibility for their emotional regulation, their well-being, their personal growth, or their problems. And it's not one-sided. After all, this is a contract. So you provide these energetic services in return for something. You've struck an unspoken bargain, and it's just as important to uncover what you receive from it and why you feel you need it. You're attached to it, and you need to be able to see it clearly. So does any of this sound familiar? Let's look at a few examples of how this plays out. When someone is upset, stressed, or angry, you instinctively believe it's your job to make them feel better. Sometimes you don't even try to fix the situation, you just absorb their emotional energy directly. And when that happens, they feel lighter, relieved, unburdened, while you're left carrying that weight. Your physical and energetic system is stuck trying to process emotions that aren't even yours. You also find yourself saying yes when you really mean no. You overextend yourself because you tell yourself they need you. Or maybe you picture their disappointment, their frustration, their anger even, if you refuse. And that thought triggers a deep, unconscious fear. So you keep saying yes, even when it contradicts what you truly want or need. And when you do try to set boundaries, guilt kicks in. You worry that by prioritizing your own needs, you're letting them down. It feels selfish, even though logically, you know it's not. And lastly, and this is a big one, you complain about how needy, immature, or demanding the other person is, all whilst continuing to maintain this unspoken contract. You feel exhausted, burdened, or even resentful, but you keep doing it anyway. And rather than acknowledging and taking responsibility for your part in it, you focus on the behavior and shortcomings of the other person. On the surface, you'd love nothing more than for this other person to take care of their own stuff. But secretly, you enjoy feeling needed or superior or valued for what you provide. And there's a cost to all this. Taking on what doesn't belong to you doesn't just drain your energy and clog up your energetic system. It erodes your sense of self and personal authority. While you're occupied fixing, managing, and absorbing what doesn't belong to you, here's what happens. When you spend so much time focusing on other people's needs, you start to lose touch with your own. You don't even stop to ask yourself what you need because you're too busy managing everything and everyone else. And along with that, you lose sight of what you're actually responsible for. You start taking on things that were never yours to carry, whilst neglecting developing your own personal authority, your ability to be faithful to your own choices, emotions, and energy. Over time, this creates emotional distortion. You might start rewarding yourself with feelings of superiority, telling yourself you're the strong one, the responsible one, the one who keeps everything together. Or maybe you develop a bit of a martyr complex, feeling like you're the only one who sacrifices and suffers, whilst the other person just takes. This pattern also shapes the kind of relationships you attract. You might find yourself constantly walking on eggshells, making sure you don't upset or disappoint others, or you become the emotional anchor, the one who's always stabilizing, fixing, or smoothing things over, while the other person relies on you to keep the balance. And even if you want to change this, you put off taking serious action because deep down, you fear what will happen. If you stop playing this role, if you stop providing this emotional and energetic service, the relationship might not survive. And that's a daunting thing to have to face. But maybe the hardest part is that this is the only way you know how to be in relationships. This has been your default for so long that not taking responsibility for others feels selfish. You don't have a clear framework for what a close, connected relationship looks like without taking on what doesn't belong to you. So you keep doing what you've always done, even when you recognize on some level how unhealthy it is. You know, it's tough to imagine changing long-established relationships. People in your life might expect you to take on their stuff. It may be people in general, if this is your overall relationship style, or it may be a select few, usually those that are very close to you. And when you try to pull back, they resist because they've become dependent on you, being the one who always picks up the pieces, smooths things over, and keeps the emotional balance. And what you may not realize is that you don't always take on other people's responsibilities to help them. You actually do it to feel like you have some control. I know this isn't intuitive. It doesn't feel like that's your motivation, but if you really can be honest and clear and you're able to peel back those layers, you'll find it's actually a control protocol, not some kind of selfless act of giving. It can look something like this. Your partner comes home from work really stressed out. You haven't learned how to allow space for another person's negative emotions, to be empathetic without directly absorbing their emotional energy right into your own system. So you unskillfully absorb your partner's stress. And you don't want this. You don't want to feel stressed. So you get to work trying to change your partner's emotional state. Not so that they will feel better, not really. You do it so you can feel better, so you don't have to feel their stress. Now, do you see how broken this dynamic is? They can't manage their emotional state, and since you can't manage your own energetic boundaries, their emotional state becomes your emotional state. Instead of taking responsibility for your own lack of skill in managing your boundaries, the only way you can stop feeling this unwanted emotion is to make them stop feeling it. It's two people not dealing with their own stuff. And in this example, it's you trying to control them in order to not have to feel what they're feeling. When we talk about taking on another person's emotions or responsibilities, it's easy to imagine that this only happens in dysfunctional relationships where the other person is essentially kicking back and expecting you to pick up their slack. But this isn't true. Developing wisdom, and it really is a deep kind of wisdom and strength, to understand your own responsibilities and allowing others to own theirs applies to every relationship. And I'll give you a personal example. When my daughter was just a toddler, her father and I separated. We spent a year in a pitched battle for custody. And for that year, the court ordered that she would live with me for a month and then with him for a month, and we'd switch off like that until final custody decisions were handed down. Now you can imagine how confusing and disruptive and emotionally difficult that was for her as such a small child. She had big feelings that she needed to process. Her little body could barely contain them. Now think about a situation like this. I love her with all my heart. I am entirely responsible for this gorgeous little girl, and I would do anything to make her feel better or to take away her pain. But look, even in a situation like this, I had to really ground myself in my strength and wisdom and let her own her feelings, to be fully present, open, and available to her, and yet let her fully own her feelings without jumping in to try to absorb or modify them in any way. And she also acted out during these years with wild rages and even destructive outbursts. It would have been easy for me to take responsibility for her behavior because I knew it was the direct outcome of my own choice to leave her father. I could have easily said, "This one is on me. It's not her fault, and this is all my doing." Well, it's hard to argue with that. And while I never blamed her for these outbursts because I knew the conditions that created them, I remained clear that her behavior was her own. I let her be the sole owner of her own actions and her own choices. So in this way, even with a child, I let her be the owner of her own inner domain, her emotions, her actions. And let me tell you, it's incredibly hard to do. My heart was absolutely broken to see her struggle like this. I could only have managed to remain clear and rooted because I had made this practice a way of life prior to any of this happening. So that's the first part of the dynamic, allowing even a small child to own what's happening in her inner domain and allowing her to own her choices and actions. The second part of this dynamic is doing the same for myself. It would have been too easy to focus all my attention outward on her since that was where all the noise and heat was coming from. But I focused inward. What was I responsible for in this situation? It's very simple, but also really, really hard. I needed to stay firmly rooted and take responsibility for my feelings, my beliefs, my inner programming, my motivations, and my actions. Now, the first thing I wanted to do was feel guilty. It would have been so easy to give in to that knee-jerk reaction, but I knew leaving was the best decision for her and for me. I knew that giving in to feeling guilty was lazy and indulgent, and it would lead to massive distortions. Think about what happens when a parent feels guilty. Instead of directly taking responsibility for the choice they made, they end up trying to make up for it by bribing their child and looking the other way when they act out. They essentially give up their responsibility to be a clear authority in their child's life. And that doesn't serve either of them. It's a huge distortion. The second thing I needed to do was avoid my natural urge to jump in and fix it, to make it better. Of course, I wanted to make her feel better for her own sake. But I was able to be starkly honest with myself and realize that a big part of my motivation was that I didn't want to have to deal with her emotional blow-ups, her rage. I mean, who wants to come home from work hoping to enjoy dinner and family time with their child only to be greeted with screaming and crying? Who wants to deal with their child sulking and crying whilst opening their birthday presents? Let's be honest, nobody wants to deal with this. And this is true in so many of our relationships, isn't it? We just want to have a nice time, a zero drama evening, and here comes the other person with all their big noisy stuff. It doesn't fit into our vision of what we wanted in the moment. So what do? Well, one of the things we do is we just try to smooth it all over. We absorb, we placate, we pull out all the stops if we have to. Out come the bribes, the negotiation. If you stop this now, I'll buy you this toy. I'll let you watch TV an extra hour. So it's not about making the other person feel better for their own sake. It's about controlling how the other person feels so you don't have to feel that way too. And whenever I felt this urge, I would breathe and bring myself back into awareness and root myself in my own energetic space. I would ask myself, what am I responsible for? And very importantly, what am I trying to avoid? I wanted to give you this example of a relationship in which I was literally responsible for the life of the other person. And even then, I needed to recognize and honor both her energetic sovereignty and my own. By diligently carrying my responsibility and not hers, I was able to stay clear and present and actually help her get through these difficult emotions, not by trespassing on her inner domain, but by showing her how to do it herself. It took about a year, and after that, she returned to her true nature, a happy, creative, strong, and loving child. But it was a hell of a year, and it took all my strength and awareness to help her through it. And just for reference, I was only 24. I want you to know this because you might think you've got to be really old and wise and have practiced these things for decades to achieve some mastery, but that's obviously not true. These are two examples of how this responsibility dynamic can play out. Take a clear-eyed look at your own responsibility dynamic in relationships and your underlying motivations. What distortions are they causing in the relationship or within yourself? Which brings us to what I observe to be the most pernicious aspect of this dynamic: inverted responsibility. Every person is responsible for themselves, their own thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and personal growth. No one else can do this for them. Yet, when you habitually insert yourself into somebody else's responsibility, you sacrifice something vital, your own self-understanding and personal authority. Rather than staying grounded in your own sovereign energetic space, you're constantly leaning into the emotions and needs and energetic states of others. And this keeps you off balance. It disconnects you from yourself. Here's the truth. One of your most important tasks in life, if you want to grow into your full awakened human consciousness, is to clearly see what is yours to carry and learn how to take full responsibility for it. No one else can truly know you. That's your job. Self-awareness isn't something you stumble into. It's something you cultivate over a lifetime. Being faithful and steadfast to yourself is a commitment only you can make. No one else can master your thoughts, your emotions, or your energy for you. No one else can keep your energetic boundaries strong and clear. And that's true for other people in your life too. So when your attention is constantly on other people, managing their emotions, solving their problems, anticipating and prioritizing their needs, focusing on their seeming inability to do it themselves, you don't have the energy or clarity to fully commit to yourself. Your first responsibility is radical devotion to yourself. Being devoted to yourself. Does that sound uncomfortable? Does it feel unspiritual? That discomfort is a sign of inverted responsibility, where your loyalty to others has taken priority over your fidelity to yourself. You may be highly attuned to what other people feel, but if you don't understand your own emotions, needs, and, this is important, your motivations, that's not true emotional intelligence. Real emotional intelligence begins with knowing yourself first. You are responsible for what happens in your energetic space, your inner world. Yet, instead of mastering that, you focus outward on controlling the emotions, needs, and reactions of others. And while you're busy trying to influence someone else's personal growth, their emotional state, or their life choices, you're neglecting your own. You convince yourself that they need to change for you to feel okay. Your energy and your focus are two of your most valuable resources. When you use them to control, manage, or fix others, you drain yourself of the very power you need for your own development, self-care, and ultimately, your awakening. So I hear you. You're saying, Amara, I'm ready to stop. But how do you stop? How do you shift out of this pattern of taking responsibility for what's not yours while neglecting what does belong to you? Now, responsibility is a huge topic, but here are a few steps to get you started. First, learn how to remain rooted and centered in your own energy field, within your own boundary. Maintaining your energetic boundary isn't about pushing other people away. Your boundary is one of your most powerful tools to help you maintain clarity and conserve your energy. Being centered and rooted within your own energy field isn't something you just resort to in times of difficulty. It's a way of life. It's a skill you can develop, and eventually it becomes your default. And from this grounded, lucid awareness, You can let the other person have their experience, their process, their challenges. This is important. To the extent that you are able to see yourself as an emotionally and energetically sovereign, whole, and separate being, to that extent you will be able to see others as energetically distinct, whole, and sovereign beings. So first you recognize and accept your own sovereignty, and then it naturally flows outward, and you can recognize and accept this is true for others. In my last podcast, I gave a technique on how to visualize yourself and the other person as distinct, whole, and energetically separate. And in light of what we've been talking about here, it would be very useful for you to revisit that episode on energetic boundaries. So let's assume you're working on staying rooted in your own energy field within your energetic boundary. You'll more easily notice when you start to lose your balance in relation to another person. When you feel yourself leaning into or absorbing someone else's emotions or struggles, take a clarifying breath and bring yourself back to your rooted, grounded state. Ask yourself, is this mine? Am I responsible for this? And clearly, you can see that you're not, because it's not happening in your energetic space. It's happening in theirs. Remind yourself of this simple truth. I am responsible for what is truly mine, and right now, what truly is yours is limited to what's happening in your inner domain. Now let's talk about how to untangle yourself from other people's problems. The next time someone brings their stress, drama, or negativity to you, take a pause before reacting. Instead of immediately jumping in to fix it, shift the responsibility back to them where it belongs. You can say something like, that sounds really tough. How do you think you'll handle it? Or you can say something like, I believe in you and I know you'll figure this out. This isn't about being cold or uncaring or unsupportive. It's about respecting both your sovereignty and theirs, because when you stop carrying what isn't yours, you give others the space to step into their own responsibility, authority, and their own creativity. If you've been carrying other people's burdens, don't you think it's time to put them down? You don't need to fix, rescue, or manage anyone else's emotions. The most important investment of your energy is in taking full responsibility for what is truly yours, cultivating wisdom and fidelity to self. In the coming week, really pay attention and notice, where am I taking on things that aren't mine? Feel yourself. In your body, you can feel yourself getting pulled out of your own energy field. When you recognize this, bring yourself back. Take a breath and bring yourself back. Get yourself rooted, and then start letting go of these things that don't belong to you. Are you ready to commit to yourself? I help people develop energetic boundaries and personal sovereignty. If you're looking for practical guidance and effective techniques, check out my 12-week Peerless program. I've left the link for you in the comments. Thank you for showing up and sharing this time with me. We'll talk again soon.